Now, what we're talking about today is how to build more muscle than ever before using my secret formula. Now, my secret formula is something that I use in I Am Paradise Fitness to help people, whether they're beginner, intermediate, or advanced, get the most out of their weight training sessions. So this is all about resistance training. It's all about going into the gym, whether you're using free weights, whether you're using dumbbells, barbells, machines, whatever it is. It's about understanding, well, what is it I'm supposed to be doing with this particular exercise, and how can I make sure that I'm executing it effectively to build the most amount of muscle possible? Because that's what we want, right? Now, I don't care if you are a jacked up bodybuilder who wants to step on stage in his skimpy purple swimwear, all fake tanned up to the max, that's what I was supposed to say, and then strut about and pose in front of everybody. Cool. You want to build muscle better than, faster than ever before. And likewise, if you're someone who maybe just wants to tone up or become more lean and defined, or build better glutes, or just look better in a t-shirt, or just walk down the beach feeling confident, then you want to build muscle too. You know, whether you call that lean and toned, whether you call that muscular, it all comes down to the fact that you actually need to build muscle to make that happen. Of course, if you want to be a pro bodybuilder, you've got to take it to some level of extreme, but most people aren't going to do that. However, you still want to build muscle in the most fastest way possible, because no one sat there and said, well, actually, yeah, I really want to build muscle, but you know what? I'd like it to take longer than it needs to. No one ever says that. Whatever goal you've got, you want to get there as fast as possible. And this formula helps you get the most out of all of your training sessions with your workouts so that you can actually achieve that. And it's based on 4 simple principles. And because sometimes I like to think I'm a clever guy, not all the time. Sometimes I'm very, very stupid, but sometimes I like to think I'm a clever guy. So the 4 things spell out the word lift. Isn't that a genius thing? I love a good acronym. So we've got L stands for lock it. And I'll explain what all of these mean in a second. So we've got lock it is L, I is intent, F is force, T is tension / tempo. So those 4 things, if we nail all of those 4 things, you will be an absolute genius when it comes to training in the gym. You'll be like a Jedi. Everyone will go to you and think, how are you getting so many good results? How are you, getting all lean and toned, and how are you building that much muscle? How come your glutes are amazing in those leggings? That's the sort of comments you'll be getting once you start executing this stuff over a period of time. You will be awesome. And everyone wants to be awesome, right? So let's start with L, lock it. Now, what the hell does that mean? It doesn't mean that sort of throat sweep if you've got a cough or something like that. We're not talking about those sort of lockets. We're talking about stability, particularly the stability of your body when it comes to carrying out any particular exercise. Because when you go to do a bench press, a squat, a leg extension, a leg curl, hip thrust, whatever it is, you will set up within that exercise ever so slightly differently to somebody else, sometimes majorly differently to someone else. But once you've decided on that ideal setup for you, you want to make sure that that is locked and fixed in place. Because there's a kind of a saying that goes around, you might see it on Instagram every now and again, is that you can't fire a cannon from a canoe. And therefore, you can't sort of fire those muscles, activate those muscles, make those muscles work if you're not doing it from a stable base. So lock it is about understanding how you're going to actually, first of all, create the right positioning within an exercise for you, and then making sure that you are focused before doing anything else on keeping that position locked in place. Now, I like to use a bench press as an example because it's quite easy to talk through, but these sort of principles can apply to upper body exercises, to lower body exercises, whatever you're doing in the gym, these fundamental principles still apply. So if we take the bench press, for example, now a bench press, when let's say you're sat on a bench or underneath the barbell, what you really need to be thinking about is your scapular retraction. Now, scapular retraction, let's bring that down to talking normal people language. Basically, we're thinking about shoulder blades here. So if you think about pinning your shoulder blades back, if you just do that now while you're listening or watching this, pinning your shoulder blades back is basically you kind of retracting your scapula, moving those those shoulder blades back and you're pinning them together. What you need to try and imagine is that you've got a pencil running down the middle of your back, and you're trying to grip that pencil with your shoulder blades. You're trying to pin that pencil in place. So that you should all be now, wherever you are in the world watching this, so it should be just trying to imagine to pin that pencil back behind you. And then you want to think about as well, while you're doing that, is taking your right shoulder blade and trying to pull it down into the pocket of your left hip. So you're basically coming back with your shoulder blades and kind of down as well. And that creates this really solid base for you to then do this type of pressing movement. Now, what you're going to be doing then is making sure that when you actually press that out, so whether you're using this in a barbell situation, whether you're using dumbbells, whether you're using a machine, the principle is still the same. And you've got to train your body to be able to do this sort of stuff and to be able to hold it under pressure and under tension while you actually then perform that repetition, that exercise, that set. So if I'm in a bench press position, I've locked back and down with my shoulder blades, I'm pinning that pencil back. Now I want to keep that in place as I then push forward with that bar, that weight, that machine. That shoulder blade, that pencil has to stay in place. That doesn't move. And that ensures then that I'm not using shoulder, I'm not using a ton of tricep in there. I'm actually using the muscle that I'm intending to work. Because that's one of the most fundamental principles about building muscle, is that you can do all these different exercises, but if you're not working the muscle that you intended to work, you're not getting the benefit from it. And that muscle, don't be surprised if it doesn't grow. If you're trying to build a better chest, if you're not able to use your chest muscles properly within an exercise, guess what? You're not going to build a bigger chest. And that goes for anything else, whether it's shoulders, whether it's glutes, quads, hamstrings, calves. If you're not able to use that muscle properly, then don't expect it to grow. And locking that position in place is super important. Again, you can look at this, for example, on a leg extension. Let's use that as a different example. So on a leg extension, I guarantee you walk into any gym, let's say it's Friday night, you walk into the gym, there's a ton of people trying to get their little pump on before they go out. And, there's a few people doing legs. They're trying to get their, get all ready for the night out. So they're trying to look their best. So they get a little pump on. Now they're sitting the leg extension machine, and they will probably, it's for Instagram. So obviously then we're using the most heaviest weight possible. We're trying to stack the machine for Instagram. And then you will see them kick that machine. You'll kick that weight up and use a ton of momentum. Now you'll also see is that their pelvis will just sort of rock and roll around in that seat. They are the definition of not being locked in place. So all of that extraneous movement is not actually focusing then that effort on the muscle that they're targeting to work, which in that case is the quad. And you'll see that there's just a ton of other stuff being used to physically move that weight through the air. And that's where people are kind of losing the intent of that exercise. They're losing the purpose of that exercise because they haven't thought about the positioning, the stability, able to then fire those muscles, make those muscles work from that stable base. So that's my advice, is to first of all, lock your position in place. Whatever that may be, for whatever exercise that is, you need to settle on, that is the position that I need to be in, and that's the position that I need locked in place. Obviously, I can't break down every single exercise for you right now, but when you're talking about pressing movements, scapular retraction is key, and is a fundamental one that you'll need to learn. You'll also then, for a lot of lower body exercises, be looking at your stability of your pelvis. So that example I gave for leg extensions would also apply, say, for leg curls as well. And you need to make sure that you're locked in place, and throughout the entire rep and set, you are actually then just using that particular muscle. Which brings me on to the second installment of our L.I.F.T principle, which is intent. Now, intent leads on from that stability position, because now we're stable, we're locked in place. Now we need to make sure that, okay, what is the intent of this exercise? What is it I am trying to do? Because there's a fundamental difference between, say, a power lifter and someone who's trying to build muscle. They both might be doing very similar exercises. So a powerlifter will be bench pressing, as might someone who's trying to build some muscle. Likewise, it might be squatting, deadlifting. some similar exercises here, but there is a fundamental difference about the intent of each person performing that exercise. So the intent of a powerlifter is to make that exercise as easy as possible. They're designing that exercise and designing that movement so that they can lift as much weight as possible in the easiest way possible, as quickly as possible. That's kind of what they're doing. Whereas if you want to build muscle as your primary goal, your real intent should be to make that exercise as hard as humanly possible. And it's a completely different mindset. You're saying, well, I don't want, let's say on a bench press, my chest to have any rest whatsoever. I want to make this super, super difficult so my chest is really working. You're thrashing it within an inch of its life. Well, maybe not quite that, because there is some sort of consideration you have to give to training volume, and you don't have to go to failure all the time, but that's another issue. But you're trying to make that muscle work as much as possible through every inch of that rep. You do not want to use things like momentum. So momentum is a killer for building muscle. You'll see the guys in the gym, and sorry guys, I keep picking on you here, but it is true. There's a lot of you bros out there that need a real lesson on how to lift properly. So if you're bouncing it off your chest, you're giving your muscle a rest. You're using momentum. You're not using the muscle itself to move that weight. You're not creating the intent that that bar moves based on that muscle contracting or muscles contracting, depending on the exercise you're doing. So let's use again the bench press as an example. It's quite an easy one for me to describe. I love a good bench press. I love teaching bench press, so it's one of my favorites. Now, for simple terms, like the chest muscle, the pec major, basically attaches at 2 points on your upper arm, your humerus, for those who like the technical names. Now, it originates down the sternum, so down like the breastbone, and across the clavicle, and a little bit underneath as well. Now, it's this sort of fan-shaped muscle that kind of goes in multiple different directions and attaches to this point on your upper arm. Now, if you were to grab that muscle that attaches to your upper arm and pull it towards your center of your body, what would happen? Well, basically, you're pulling on that muscle and your arm would come across your chest. So that effectively is the job of that pec major, is to kind of bring that upper arm across your chest like that. So that is the intent of that pec muscle. That is what it's trying to do. Now, that then should create a real different mindset when it comes to an exercise like the bench press or machine chest press or whatever it is that you're doing, or even like flies and things like that. Because no longer is it about pushing straight out and up, it is about biceps coming across chest, which creates a really different kind of movement to just straight up. Straight up can often have you incorporating a lot of front delt, it can be a lot of tricep. And the classic example is you see a lot of guys in the gym who come off a good set of bench press and they go, yeah, man, what a quality set. And then they're just rubbing the front of their shoulder. It's like, yeah, okay, dude, you actually probably just used most of your shoulder there and probably did yourself some damage in the process. But let's gloss over that. And you wonder why you haven't built any chest muscles. So you're in that position where you've got to understand what is actually this muscle supposed to be doing and what is the intent behind this muscle. So that's the first thing. Then you're going to say, well, almost like you're taking this little inventory of what you need to be thinking about before you initiate every single rep. So let's again use the bench press as an example, is that when the bar is down on your chest, the first thing you want to think about is, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? You're supposed to be initiating this movement with your chest muscles. So you're thinking about, okay, biceps coming across chest, because that's what the pec does. And then you're going to create some tension in that muscle straight away as well. You're going to start thinking about that so that when you move that bar, the first millimeter, the intent comes from using your chest muscle to make that move. You're not thinking about, or just how quickly can I shove this weight through the air? That's just completely irrelevant. What you're really focusing on is, how can I use my chest muscle to the maximum for this exercise? And that creates intent. And that's the same for whether you're doing any exercise. Is I would always say to people, and I'll talk about this when we come to tempo at the end, is that you're thinking about almost like even not just a half second, a 1 second, just mental inventory of what you're trying to do. So when you're doing the bench press, you're thinking your shoulder blades back, you're thinking about that pencil, you're thinking about creating intent on your pec, you're thinking about biceps across chest, all within a very split second. And then that just helps you to create the intent that you want. And whether that's like you're doing hip thrusts and you're doing glutes and things like that, again, you're thinking about glutes, you're thinking about contracting those glutes before that weight moves, because it's not about ego. It's not about shifting as much weight through the air as possible. It's, are you contracting the glutes and are you using the glutes through that hip thrust exercise? So that's intent. So we've got lock it. So that's creating the stable base for you to use the muscles that you need to use for that exercise. And then intent is thinking about, what is this exercise supposed to be doing? What is my intention? And am I now able to use the muscle that I need to use to execute this exercise effectively? So they're the first two bits. Then we're talking about force. So force is actually just the power you're going to generate from this particular exercise. And when that comes from a stable base with intent, then you really are just trying to move that weight as fast, well, not as fast as you can necessarily, but with as much force as possible. Obviously, the weight that you use may dictate how fast that actually moves, but you need to do the force part of the process from a basis of having the other two things established. If you're trying to just use force without the other two bits, that's where people come a cropper. And that's usually where things go the wrong way around. You'll find that people really focus on force first. And that is a case of, right, okay, I'm a macho dude, whether I'm doing squats or whatever, I just want to lift weight. And that becomes from, okay, just ram this weight up as any way, shape or form possible, balls to the technique, balls to the consequences of my joints being fucked. And it's just about creating as much force as possible and sort of like moving around in the bench and not staying in place just to get that weight up and look cool in the gym. That's kind of where things go wrong. Focusing on force first is never the answer. But you do need to focus on force once you've got the other two pieces of the puzzle in place. If you have your position locked and fixed in place, you have the intent of the muscle that you're trying to work being the focal point, then when you create force, you are really making that muscle work and you're really putting it under stress and you're actually making it, forcing it to grow. So the important thing there is force doesn't necessarily have to mean you do things slow. It just means you have to do things accurately. So whether you create as much force as you can and that weight moves quick, that's cool if you've got the other two bits in place. If it's a little bit slower because you're using a heavy weight, that's cool too. It just means that, you know, you are still using that muscle effectively. So that's force. It's a very quick one for us because it's just literally a case of those two other bits in place and then bang, let's go. The next element, the last element, is the tension and the tempo. Now, this is super important because, as I mentioned before, the difference between the powerlifter and the bodybuilder, or, you know, someone who just wants to get lean toned or whatever you want to call it, is about tension. Like I said before, it's about you're making this exercise as difficult as possible. And that's a real mindset shift because a lot of people just want to get the weight up and things like that. Well, actually, no, I want my muscle to struggle through every inch of this rep. I want it to be controlled. I don't want it to be reckless in terms of risking injury, but I want it to be a controlled, difficult repetition all the way through that repetition. That's what you want. So that's where you're creating tension. There's lots of different ways you can do that. Obviously, having the other parts, component parts of the thing, the formula that I've just kind of laid out for you is a key part of that. Other things you can do, for example, is, like I said with the intent section, it's create tension before you move. So when you're, for example, doing a bicep curl and the bicep, your arm is fully extended, before you start moving that weight, start to think about, okay, contract bicep, squeeze that bicep as hard as you can before it even moves the weight. Then move it under that constant tension. And even just doing that without any weight in your hand, you can make that tough by just squeezing here and just squeezing as hard as you can with no weight in your hand, and now start contracting that as hard as possible. That you can actually make that quite an intense exercise. Now imagine putting a weight in your hand and doing the same thing. It's no longer about just arbitrarily just lifting this weight as much as possible. You've got to think with your brain about what you're actually trying to do. And when you start to create that tension before exercise begins, before the repetition begins, throughout that rep, you will have a much better opportunity to create more tension throughout the exercise, throughout the rep, and have more progress. And again, we can use a leg curl for an example. You can use a leg extension, for example. Leg extension being a great one. Before you move that weight, contract your quad. Contract your quad before you lift that weight, before you kick that weight up. So you're contracting your quad hard, then you move the weight up and you maintain that contraction. And that will make it really difficult. And you may have a real rude awakening when it comes to the actual weight you can lift. And that is something you've got to be open to, about dropping weight to actually get more out of the exercise you're doing. And you can do this for lots of different exercises, pretty much every exercise you can do this for. Again, let's go back to the ladies' favorite, the hip thrust. When you're in a hip thrust position, before you move that weight, before you start thrusting, on each repetition, are you making sure that your glutes are contracted? Are you squeezing your butt hard as possible and then moving that weight up and getting a deeper contraction? Then as that weight comes down, are you maintaining that contraction and then having that little inventory check before you go again to then contract again and move that forward? Or is it just a case of you just moving your hips up and down as fast as possible? And again, that will get you some development. You will have to use your quads to do that to some degree, your glutes to some degree, to actually make that happen, make that movement happen. But is it optimal? Is it going to help you build more muscle than ever before? Probably not. And that's the key thing, is that you want to be using the muscles that you intend to work all of the time. You don't want to use guesswork. You don't want to be saying, well, I'm going to move this, and then it's going to be, I'm guessing as to whether I'm contracting my glutes, or I'm guessing as to whether I'm contracting my quads, my chest, or whatever it may be. You want to know, I'm creating tension in these muscles, and I'm maintaining that tension throughout the repetition. Now, again, you hear talk about time under tension and things like this as being like the be all and end all. And yes, tension is great, but that doesn't necessarily have to mean slow. However, tempo is a really great way to teach yourself to focus on all of these different things, to focus on locking your position in place, to focus on intent, to focus on generating force, and to focus on tension. Tempo can be a great way to actually make that happen. And the way I would think about that would be the eccentric part of the movement. So the easier part, or the relaxation part of the movement, is if you make that consciously as slow as possible. So like 3 or 4 seconds, that would basically, you'd have a hard argument to say that that's not making that exercise harder. You obviously, we're bench pressing, you let it crash down into your chest. That's easy. Letting it slowly come down over 3 or 4 seconds, that's harder. Again, making it harder through every inch of the rep. Then when you come to actually press that weight, obviously a lot of it's going to be dictated by the weight you're actually using. But you could say, if it's a really explosive repetition, then you could argue that maybe that weight's not heavy enough to elicit the most amount of muscle growth, potentially. So I would say have this 3 to 4 second eccentric, i.e. when the weight's coming down, or like the relaxation part, or whatever you want to call it, eccentric part of the movement, that's like 3 or 4 seconds. Then you have your 1 second pause to take your little inventory of what it is you're going to do. 1 second pause, and then create with intent, and then force the rep up or down, or wherever it is direction the force of the rep is going, the concentric part of that exercise. And that should probably last anywhere, so I'd say 2 to 3 seconds, most likely going to be 2. And then when you get to the top of the repetition, you have a little bit of a choice to make. And it depends on the exercise here. So for example, like on a hip thrust, there could be some real advantages to holding that contraction for a second right at the top of that movement, getting a little bit more out of it. Again, with a leg extension, be the same. Contracting at the top of that movement is obviously, again, going to make that exercise a little bit harder. Whereas maybe a bench press, it's almost like a little bit of a rest when you're up at that top of that position. So you probably don't want to hang out there. The general rule that I would say to people is wherever that exercise is like hardest, probably worth spending at least a second there per rep, if not a tiny bit more. So wherever you feel that exercise is at its hardest, it can be worth spending one brief second just there, making sure the contractions are good, making sure you're getting the most out of that particular exercise. So that is the secret formula. That is the formula that I teach to my clients that I've just gone through here in this quick half an hour-ish demonstration of the L.I.F.T principle. So lock it in place, lock that position. Intent, create intent with the muscle or muscles you're trying to work. Force, use force to lift that weight. And then tension and tempo, use those to your advantage to own every inch of the rep and make it as difficult as possible. Do those 4 things, I guarantee you will transform your performance in the gym, you will transform your progress, and you'll make sure that you're actually getting what you need to get out of each workout in the gym. So I hope you enjoyed this little bit of content. Hopefully it was useful for you, and hopefully you can apply it into the gym yourself. Now, before I wrap up this particular piece of knowledge bombage, if bombage is a word, it is now. If you want to get your hands on a free copy of my Lean Life Kickstarter Pack, which has got a 4-week training program in it, and that's an extract of my Total Body Blueprint program that some of my clients use to great effect within the gym, then you can grab that for free. And I put a link there where you can actually go grab that. And over the course of 4 weeks, basically, I'll send you a bunch of other stuff. So on like day 2, I'll send you a guide on how to calculate your calories and your macros and all that sort of stuff. And then I'll also send you some recipe packs. I'll send you some cheat sheets on how to basically deal with cravings, on how to, as I call it, live leaner at work, because we know work can always kind of take you off on different tangents. So if you want to grab that, go grab it. But if you have kind of watched this the whole way through, listen to this the whole way through, then I appreciate you. Thank you very much. But for now, I'll say keep living the lean life, and I'll see you sometime soon.